Hi, everybody. I'm John Tananis, Director of Real Estate at Facebook. And today we brought along Everett Kidback. Everett's here. Everett's one of our designers, but I did want to get a picture of everybody. And I'm going to post this. So, Cindy, is it okay if I tag everybody? Okay. Your name, please? Your name? Cindy, well, this is going to take a while. Is that okay? Anyway, I'm John Tananis.
So I'm Randy Howder. I've, like Cindy said, had the fortune of working with these guys for the last couple of years on a pretty cool project, which we hope to tell you a little bit about, and then kind of tell you about sort of what we think it means for the larger workplace community. So with that, hopefully nobody gets sick.
Oh, great. So anyway, Facebook is a company that, it's about 8 years old, and it's grown from a dorm room, marketed dorm room in Harvard Square, to just over 1 billion users that we celebrated about 2 weeks ago. In 2009, Facebook moved our headquarters from a group of buildings, a variety of buildings in downtown Palo Alto, to Northern California, Stanford Research Park, and we quickly outgrew that space in 2010 when I joined Facebook from Oracle. At that point, we found ourselves in new territory. It was pretty exciting. It was a startup culture. We were in growth mode. We were opening field offices, maybe 10 field offices, 15 field offices every 6 months, and we were running out of space in our permanent home. We only had 2 spaces in our two large, about 250,000 square feet in near Northern California Ave. Despite the financial and consumer success, this was actually a very risky period of time for Facebook. At that point, we're out of space, and we had to make a decision. Do we want to stay in Palo Alto, or do we want to move nearby to expand our space? Startup space, as you know, is very, by nature, it's space that's improvised, it's experimental, it can be cheap and flexible. And it's these little molecules, these little nuggets within the startup space that actually kind of formulate the corporate culture for many companies, as it did for Facebook. That DNA, those molecules can be easily lost when a company starts to become corporate and the corporate policy starts to creep in. And I don't mean a style or an aesthetic, but rather than an attitude where people become more specialized and siloed. And it was our job to move the company to a new space and yet retain the culture. The risk to Facebook was that we're about to move to about 1 million square feet close to home, and it's difficult to find space in Palo Alto, as you know, close to Palo Alto. And so we decided to move to the Menlo Park, the former Sun Microsystems campus, which is about 6 miles away. The good news for me was I was actually familiar with this space about 20 years ago. Myself and actually a couple others in the room, Scott Ekman, who I saw here today, we helped build this space about 20 years ago. And in fact, I was at Oracle at the time, and I kind of knew that Facebook was interested in purchasing this campus. So the big question for us, how could we grow quickly and move into a corporate campus without impacting the culture, without losing that culture, that DNA, those molecules that were so important to us? And at that point, we brought Gensler in, and I had experience with Gensler. I knew that they had experience doing massive projects. We had to build this within about 15 months to get about 1 million square feet online, and they understood the fundamentals of how to make an organization successful.
So a couple things. Our work over the past couple of years has dealt with some of the fundamental shifts that I think some people in this room have talked about. Certainly I'm preaching to the choir here. But virtual work and mobility, obviously driving or increasing in sort of the way that people work. The fact that has resulted in group work being the reason that people come into the office to be physically present with each other and to be in these sort of innovation-centric environments. And really, rather than being loyal to a company, people are now loyal to, or they're at a company to build their own personal network. That's the path, that's the career path. It's not like your dad working at Oldsmobile for 40 years. You're there to really be around like-minded people and to extend your personal network. But really, the fourth thing that we see emerging, and our work has sort of started to reflect that over the past couple of years, is this idea of something we've been calling beta space. This is a photo of a project we did in Chicago called 1871, which many of you may have seen. It's actually in the merchandise mart. Beta space comes from these ideas that John mentioned, startup culture, from things like rapid prototyping, from movements like co-working. All of these things sort of intertwined. And it's about space where the primary mission is to support and nurture really a generative culture. And on the other side of this, so these are sort of, these spaces are raw. They're about end user experimentation, and they're about, not branding, but sort of cultural artifacts, such as art installations. And rather than conference rooms, there's a nice coffee shop. This happens to be Intelligentsia, which is like Chicago's Blue Bottle. On the other side is what we're calling sort of investment space. So you may remember this space from last year. WORKTECH was held in Nokia, which was in Sunnyvale, which is one of our projects. It's not to say that this isn't an innovative space, but it's focused on transforming what is an entrenched corporate culture, almost trying to bend the curve of how people work and how they approach what they're doing. It's a beautiful, highly tuned and functional space, and it reflects a company that's making a huge implicit investment in long-term transformation. So a lot of effort went into reinforcing the kind of Scandinavian heritage of the company, while developing a kit of parts that really enabled engineers to transform how they work. The company was moving from the waterfall development process to the agile process, and so this was a huge watershed moment for the company, and the space had to help them get there, and by all accounts it's doing that. But for a company like Facebook, still very much in the growth mode, this idea of beta space was important, because that kind of space allows for continued experimentation. It allows for sort of a nurturing of culture that has not yet fully developed, but you don't want to sort of kill it by, as John said, kind of the corporateness creeping in, and that by that we mean you start hiring all these people who have their little fiefdoms of responsibility, and before you know it, you've got these rigid standards and you've got all these ratios, and it's really difficult to experiment because you've got to go through the approvals process, and everybody's part of that decision, and then you end up 20 years down the road with cube farms and everyone's miserable. So how did we get there? We in meeting up with these guys, we did a couple of things. We did a lot of observation and really shadowing end users to really get under their skin and learn the nuances about how they interacted. Many of these photos, Everett took himself. And that was really a collaborative effort between our team and the Facebook team. We studied things that you're familiar with, the utilization of space types to really put a kind of a business case around investment in different types of space. That before it was just sort of a hunch, and now we had hard numbers to back up what anecdotally the engineers had been telling us. And then we kind of went out in the world and looked at what makes other communities successful and what makes innovation communities so interesting. And very much of what resulted contained, is sort of the core of Facebook's DNA. We also looked back at some work we'd done in 2008 when they were still in downtown Palo Alto and very much a startup. And what did we learn then that sort of is still true today, because that points us towards sort of some of these cultural DNA fragments that John was speaking of. And so, the result is very much contains the core of what had made Facebook successful, but with an eye towards being, scalable for the future, that they weren't going to just rest in this one space, so they would continue to grow and evolve. And so what that means is a lot of the interiors, most of the interiors actually, are largely really a blank canvas onto which Facebook can project, then the employees especially can project their own identities. And, these are all from different buildings. There's 9 buildings, and they all have very different personalities because of different designers that were involved and different people that we talked to. And at the end of the day, this can be a little bit messy sometimes, but this is who they are, and so rather than kind of staging the photographs, this is sort of kind of documentary style, what it's really like to be there. And it's not for everybody, but Everett can probably chime in a little bit.
Yeah, so I've had the experience of being with the company and seeing the different phases that we've gone through, and like John and Randy had said, dealing with this kind of like rapid scale and growth, it was really hard to make sure that we're treating the culture like a bonsai tree and kind of not being really rigid and forcing it in a certain direction, but just creating a space that the culture could actually flourish. So a lot of the decisions that we made weren't necessarily architectural or design decisions, but really about how to instill our core values as a company and let the people that inhabit the space actually take ownership of it and just make it feel like really organic and not a very sterile and premeditated space. Like a lot of the core values we have are like moving fast, obviously, so using a lot of the raw materials and the kind of just industrial space actually is by nature just the way that we've approached it. We didn't necessarily make intentional decisions to leave everything raw and unfinished, but that was like partly because we wanted to move fast, but also it just lent to this notion that we're not finished with the work that we're trying to do, and we wanted everything to not feel very precious when we moved there. So a lot of these things, like Randy said, are basically just a palette for the people that sit in the immediate area, and they're just like really empowered to take control of their space and bring in artists and designers and friends and just like hang and do whatever they want. So like these pictures that Randy showed, they really are just documentary of how those people live there. And we move around really fluidly inside the campus. So they'll move and take their stuff, and other people will move in, and this, over time, the campus just really starts to change and take shape. And what you see today was not how it was a year ago versus 2 years ago down in South California Avenue.
It's different every day, and I think one of the things that's interesting is like, how do you take what maybe was like the most forlorn, like banal, no offense, John, forlorn and banal sort of office park, and no offense to any of those who were involved in the original project, but when you're competing for talent against companies that are moving into San Francisco or in the sort of developments that are happening there, how do we bring a little bit of that downtown Palo Alto to this site? And so that was one of the major strands of work, was really transforming this public space and bringing in amenities. And this is the constantly changing streetscape that I think actually complements the constantly changing workscape, and they really work together in a very fluid way.
So the one thing to reinforce what Randy's saying about what we started with the canvas of Menlo Park, you can see it here. When we started the project, we actually walked around the campus and we said, oh my God, this looks like an Italian convalescent home. And that's what we had to work with. I mean, so anyway, I wanted to mention two things, two lessons learned here. One, working with Gensler, was the fact that when we first started this project, often architects want to design the project, and we fought with them often, and there was kind of a learning curve, and we often would say, we want you to undesign the space. We don't want you to design it. And so a lot of the pictures you saw up here, I was looking at them, and you see a lot of patina on the wall, and you see a lot of pictures and art. That wasn't there when we moved in. It was a blank canvas. The walls were white. We used a lot of white. We're starting to use a little bit more color. But really the employees, the Facebook culture has really added to that patina of the campus. The other thing that I wanted to mention was, I don't know if you can go back to the previous slide or not. Yeah, this one. One of the things that we learned from when we were in Palo Alto, we loved downtown Palo Alto. We could go to restaurants. We could go out and get snacks and coffee. And we could move from building to building. Unfortunately, it wasn't great because communicating from building to building was really difficult. So moving to Menlo Park, 1 million square feet, it was ideal for getting everybody together under one roof. However, it was the Salt Flats. It's this Italian convalescent home in the Salt Flats. There's nothing worse. There was nothing out there. So what we did is we infused.
They call it San Quentin, it was called.
They did that 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I hated that.
San Quentin.
Anyway, what we did was we infused the campus with a ton of amenities. Some of them you can see here. Most of them now, they're all there. We're having a great success with our doctor's office. We've got Phil's Coffee. We've got Pizza Window. We've got Fuki Sushi that just opened up. You pay for Fuki Sushi, but actually it's working out really well. So by creating this kind of urban environment, the employees are really happy to hang out and to socialize and collaborate. This is actually a photo, I think, of...
From a hackathon.
That
was this the hackathon?
At the IPO event.
The IPO event. One of the cool things I want to share here, this was, you can see the bridge where the people are standing on the bridge. One of the things about our culture is very flat organizationally. And one of the things that we figured out were these buildings were 2 and 3 stories high. They were about 50,000 square feet each floor plate. And people didn't communicate. They didn't socialize between floors very well. So one of the ideas was we actually created these wide bridges that connect the 2nd and 3rd floors. And on either side of the bridge is a automatic door. So if you're with your laptop and a coffee in one hand, you can walk through, the door opens, and you can continue to collaborate and socialize with your partners or on a product team.
They were actually supposed to have the swishing Star Trek door sound, but we ran into some copyright issues.
But it really does create a sense of continuity between the space, for sure.
So this was our last slide. This is something that Chris Cox, our product, I won't read it, our VP of product actually, Everett reports up to Chris, had mentioned. And I think when I first interviewed at Facebook, I met Chris, and I remember him telling me, he said, you know, our buildings are treated like containers. There's these empty containers, and it'd be great if we could just throw a pile of, shit in the middle and let people figure out where it goes. And that's kind of what we did in a way. And it seems to work out pretty well.
And Randy helped us.
And Randy helped us organize that stuff.
But this is my favorite image of the project, which kind of gives you an idea of this sort of transparency between where people work and this sort of urban street that we've created. And so hopefully many of you probably visited, but that's it. So questions?
We have time for one question for John, Everett, or Randy, or all three. Who wants to be the one question asker?
One question? That's sad. We got
Somebody back there. Ooh, here comes one.
Hi, it's Chris from New York. I was wondering, we may all be thinking it. You're running a website, so how many people does it really take to keep a website up? You're doing other things, of course, developing new products, keeping ahead of the game, but you've got a bunch of different buildings. I'd just like to understand a bit about the programming of the space. What are the largest business units, and how do you bring it all together internally, and like, how many people are there?
You want to answer that? Or?
I think...
I couldn't make out most of the question, but
Yeah.
how many people does it take to run a website? It's actually much more in terms of like engineering running, really 1 billion people's data through it. So there's a lot of engineers that manage that infrastructure. There are a lot of people on the business side, sales, marketing. You might know a little bit more about each specific department, but how many people is the headcount now?
4,000 worldwide.
Yeah, 4,000 worldwide. So on campus here, there's about like 2,800, I think.
Yeah, we're probably in the 3,000 range in the campus.
Yeah.
So you're still primarily centered in that one campus, and then there are sort of smaller satellites around the world?
Yeah, this is the main headquarters. There are some engineering offices globally, but there are also like a lot of sales offices in different parts of the world. And it's probably split 50-50 engineering and design versus like sales and business administration. So.
But I would say in terms of the planning, there's definitely, it's an engineering-centric organization, and so the workplace model is optimized for engineering, so all space can be engineering space, and then the non-engineering people can work in those
It's
spaces.
a pretty generic base layer that everyone gets like the same module.
I think to answer your question though too, we're a product-driven, engineering-driven company, and one of the things that we figured out, we have 8 buildings that you can see on campus. One of the things that we figured out was the fact that having 8 buildings, 2 or 3 stories, is not ideal the way people work out. So that's why we're building the campus across the street, which is a little bit different. It's actually 1 building, 1 room, where we will have our product teams sitting in one space, about 500,000 square feet in 1 room.